The price of valor. Lieutenant Zara Henderson sprinted through the pulsing red emergency lights of Nexus Prime's engineering deck, her boots echoing against the metal flooring. The reactor core's warning sirens pierced the air, but she barely registered them. 20,000 lives depended on what she did in the next few minutes. Engineering deck, report status. Commander Krelthor's voice boomed through the ship's communication system. His usually stoic Centaurian tone carried an edge of concern. Zara reached the reactor control panel, her fingers flying across the holographic interface. Lieutenant Henderson here, sir. The containment field is failing. I need to manually reset the quantum stabilizers. Negative, Lieutenant. Radiation levels in that section are approaching critical. Evacuate immediately. She glanced at the readings. The commander wasn't wrong, the radiation levels would be lethal to most species. But humans had always been surprisingly resistant to radiation compared to their alien counterparts. They had about 3 minutes before catastrophic failure. The evacuation would take 5. With respect, sir, there won't be a ship to evacuate if someone doesn't fix this now. The silence that followed told her everything. Commander Krelthor understood the math as well as she did. Proceed with extreme caution, Lieutenant. Medical team standing by. Zara didn't waste breath responding. She pulled up the maintenance hatch and dropped down into the service tunnel beneath the reactor core. The heat hit her immediately, like walking into an oven. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she crawled toward the stabilizer array. The first sign something was wrong came when she felt the metal grating beneath her hands beginning to warp from the heat. She quickened her pace, ignoring the warning tingles racing across her skin. The stabilizer array loomed ahead, its crystals pulsing an angry red instead of their usual calm blue. Her hands moved automatically, muscle memory from countless drills taking over. Remove the safety locks. Reset the primary crystal. Realign the quantum matrix. Each movement had to be perfect, despite the trembling in her fingers from the radiation exposure. She was so focused on the task that she didn't notice the support beam above her head starting to buckle. The first warning was a metallic groan, followed by a sharp crack. Zara looked up just as the beam gave way. She had a split second to make a choice, dodge and lose precious seconds on the repair, or finish the sequence and take the hit. Her body moved before her mind finished the calculation. The beam came down just as she slammed the final crystal into place. White-hot pain exploded across her shoulder and arm as several hundred pounds of superheated metal pinned her against the stabilizer housing. She bit back a scream, forcing herself to reach past the pain and input the activation sequence. The reactor's angry howl died down to a gentle hum. Blue light replaced red as the containment field stabilized. Through the haze of pain, Zara managed a grim smile. Engineering to bridge, she gasped. Crisis averted. Reactor stabilized. Though I could use a hand down here. Medical team already en route, Commander Krelthor replied. Status of your injuries? Zara tried to move her pinned arm and immediately regretted it. Just a scratch, sir. Nothing Dr. Nixis can't fix. The medical team found her 10 minutes later, still pinned and surprisingly conscious. Dr. Nixis's crystalline features caught the restored lighting as the Valterian physician assessed the situation. Their translucent hands moved with precise efficiency as they scanned Zara's injuries. A scratch? Dr. Nixis's melodic voice carried a note of disbelief. Lieutenant, your arm has sustained severe crushing damage, second-degree burns, and possible radiation exposure. Your definition of scratch requires serious revision. Zara attempted a shrug with her good shoulder as the rescue team carefully lifted the beam. Ship still here, isn't it? That's the important part. Dr. Nixis's crystalline structure flickered with what Zara had learned to recognize as exasperation. Your species' capacity for understatement continues to astound me. Prepare for emergency transport to Medical Bay. As the medical team worked to stabilize her for transport, Zara caught snippets of their concerned whispers. The alien seemed genuinely confused by her calm demeanor despite the severity of her injuries. She wanted to explain that it wasn't about being tough or brave, it was simply what needed to be done. The last thing she saw before the transport beam engaged was Commander Krelthor arriving at the scene, his four eyes widening at the destruction around them. His mandibles clicked in what might have been approval or concern. "Well done, Lieutenant," he said simply. "Though we need to discuss your definition of acceptable risk." Zara managed a weak salute with her good arm before the medical bay materialized around her. As Dr. Nixis and their team began their work, she closed her eyes and finally allowed herself to feel the full extent of her injuries. She had done what needed to be done. Now she could rest. The ship was safe. Her crew was safe. Everything else was just details. Beyond physical limits. The medical bay of Nexus Prime hummed with activity as Dr. Nixis studied the holographic display of Lieutenant Henderson's injuries. The Valterian's crystalline form refracted the soft blue light, casting prismatic patterns across the sterile surfaces. Their assistant, Pip, a diminutive meridian with large, empathic eyes, hovered nearby, monitoring Zara's vital signs. "Fascinating," Dr. Nixis murmured, their crystalline fingers manipulating the holographic image. "The human pain response appears to be actively suppressed, yet there's no evidence of shock or systemic shutdown." Zara, conscious but groggy from the initial treatment, managed a weak smile. "You should see me during tax season, document." Pip's antenna twitched in confusion. "I don't understand the correlation between financial documentation and pain tolerance, Lieutenant." "Human humor, Pip," Dr. Nixis explained, not looking up from their scans. "They often employ it as a defensive mechanism during periods of physical distress." Commander Krelthor entered the medical bay, his towering Centaurian frame ducking slightly through the doorway. All four of his eyes focused on Zara's injured form. "Doctor, your report." "The lieutenant has sustained significant trauma to her right arm and shoulder. Multiple fractures, severe muscle damage, and moderate radiation exposure. By any reasonable medical standard, she should be in extreme distress." Dr. Nixis's crystalline surface rippled with barely contained frustration. "Instead, she's making jokes about terrestrial taxation systems." Krelthor's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "And her prognosis?" "With proper treatment, including cellular regeneration therapy and neural pathway reconstruction, she should recover full functionality." However, Dr. Nixis turned their gleaming gaze to Zara, that assumes the patient follows medical directives precisely. "I'm right here, you know," Zara pointed out, attempting to sit up before Pip's gentle but firm hands pushed her back down. "Indeed you are," Dr. Nixis agreed. "And you will remain right here for at least the next 7 solar cycles. Your human capacity for rapid healing is remarkable, but it's not instantaneous." Commander Krelthor moved closer to the bed, his massive frame casting a shadow over Zara. "Lieutenant, your actions saved this vessel and its crew. However, the manner in which you disregarded your own safety concerns me. The Nexus Prime cannot afford to lose valuable officers to unnecessary heroics." "With respect, Commander," Zara shifted slightly, wincing as the movement pulled at her injuries, "there wasn't time for anything else. Sometimes you have to roll the dice." "Roll the..." "Pip, make a note to update our database on human idioms," Dr. Nixis sighed. "Lieutenant, your injuries could have been fatal. The radiation levels alone should have incapacitated you." "But they didn't," Zara countered. "Humans are tougher than we look." "Tough, yes," Dr. Nixis conceded, their crystalline surface flickering with concern. "But not invulnerable. The cellular damage from radiation exposure alone will take days to repair, even with our most advanced regeneration techniques." Pip, who had been quietly observing, suddenly spoke up. "Doctor, I'm detecting unusual endorphin levels in the lieutenant's system. Could this explain her atypical response to injury?" Dr. Nixis examined the readings. Partially. Human biology appears to have evolved multiple redundant systems for dealing with severe trauma. It's quite remarkable, really. Their bodies don't just fight injury, they adapt to it. Evolutionary necessity, Commander Krelthor observed. Humans evolved on a death world, after all. Their history is written in survival against overwhelming odds. Zara listened to them discuss her biology with a mixture of amusement and fatigue. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the pain was becoming harder to ignore. Still, she maintained her composed expression. Years of working with alien species had taught her that they often misinterpreted human pain responses as either reckless bravado or suspicious stoicism. Dr. Nixis noticed her patient's subtle shift in demeanor. Your pain levels are increasing. I can administer additional analgesics. I'm fine, Zara started to say, but was interrupted by Pip's emphatic chirp. Lieutenant, my species can literally feel your pain. You are not fine by any measurable standard. Commander Krelthor's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. Lieutenant, consider that an order. Accept the medication. Zara sighed in defeat. Yes, sir. As Dr. Nixis prepared the injection, they continued their observation. The human tendency to minimize injury extends beyond physical resilience. It appears to be a deeply ingrained psychological response. Commander, I recommend updating our medical protocols for human crew members. Their self-reporting of injuries cannot be considered reliable. Noted, Doctor. I'll have First Officer Vextra review our emergency response procedures. The commander turned back to Zara. Rest, Lieutenant. That's an order. The ship will survive without you for a few days. As the medication began to take effect, Zara felt her rigid control starting to slip. The pain dulled to a manageable throb, and her eyelids grew heavy. Through the growing haze, she heard Dr. Nixis continuing to dictate notes about human pain responses and healing factors. The last thing she heard before drifting off was Pip's quiet observation, perhaps their strength isn't in not feeling pain, but in choosing to feel it and continue anyway. The medical bay fell silent except for the soft hum of monitoring equipment and the crystalline chime of Dr. Nixis's movements. Commander Krelthor stood watching his injured officer for a moment longer, all four eyes blinking in sequence. There was much about humans he still didn't understand, but their capacity for sacrifice in service of others was becoming clearer with each passing day. Understanding human spirit. 3 days into her mandated recovery, Lieutenant Zara Henderson was already testing Dr. Nixis's patients. The Valterian physician found their patient attempting to access engineering reports on a borrowed data pad, her injured arm cradled in a regenerative field. Lieutenant, Dr. Nixis's crystalline form pulsed with barely contained frustration, mental stress impedes physical recovery. This is true for all known sentient species, humans included. I'm not stressed, Zara protested, quickly hiding the pad beneath her blanket. I'm staying informed. There's a difference. First Officer Vextra chose that moment to enter the medical bay, their serpentine form gliding smoothly across the floor. The Ceralian officer's scales shifted through shades of blue and green, reflecting their curious mood. Ah, our resident puzzle, Vextra observed, compound eyes focusing on Zara. I've been studying human psychological profiles. Your species displays fascinating contradictions. We try our best, Zara replied dryly, still trying to reach the hidden data pad with her good arm. Dr. Nixis promptly confiscated the device, their crystalline fingers clicking against its surface. The first officer is correct. You humans seem to excel at working against your own best interests. Pip emerged from a nearby supply room, arms full of regenerative bandages. The small meridian's empathic abilities immediately picked up on the tension in the room. Lieutenant Henderson's frustration levels are elevating again. Because I'm fine, Zara insisted, flexing her injured arm despite the twinge of pain. The regenerative field is doing its job. I could at least review maintenance reports from here. Vextra's scales rippled with interest. Fascinating. Even in the face of clear medical evidence, you persist in minimizing your condition. Is this a cultural imperative or a personal characteristic? It's called being stubborn, Dr. Nixis interjected, running another scan over Zara's injury. And while your cellular regeneration is progressing remarkably well, you are far from fine. Zara slumped back against her pillow, frustration evident in every line of her body. I can't just lie here doing nothing. The reactor core nearly failed. There could be underlying damage we haven't detected yet. Your engineering team is quite capable, Vextra noted, their tail curling thoughtfully. Yet you display symptoms of anxiety when separated from your duties. This seems inefficient. Inefficient? Zara laughed, then winced as the movement jarred her arm. First officer, humans aren't exactly known for our efficiency. Pip approached with fresh bandages, their large eyes full of concern. Your pain levels are spiking again, Lieutenant. Please try to remain still. Pain is just information, Zara muttered, echoing an old Earth military saying. It doesn't have to be orders. Dr. Nixis's crystalline surface flickered rapidly, their equivalent of rolling eyes. Information that your body is sending for a very good reason. The regenerative field needs time to rebuild your muscle tissue and nerve pathways properly. Vextra moved closer, their scales shifting to a deeper blue of scientific curiosity. Perhaps we are approaching this incorrectly. Lieutenant, would you explain the logic behind your resistance to recovery protocols? Zara was quiet for a moment, considering. It's not about logic, First Officer. Humans, we need to feel useful. Being sidelined, even for good reasons, goes against everything we're taught about pulling our weight. Even when that weight could literally tear your healing tissues? Dr. Nixis asked pointedly. Especially then, Zara replied with a slight smile. We're not good at sitting still when there's work to be done. Vextra's scales rippled with understanding. Ah. This relates to your species' pack bonding behaviors. You feel you are letting down your tribe? Crew, Zara corrected. But yes, something like that. Every minute I'm in here is a minute I'm not helping maintain the ship. Pip, who had been quietly changing the bandages, suddenly spoke up. But you are helping the crew, Lieutenant. By healing properly, you ensure you'll be able to return to full duty without complications. Dr. Nixis nodded approvingly at their assistant. Precisely. Medicine isn't punishment, Lieutenant. It's maintenance, just like your beloved engines. Vextra's scales shifted to a thoughtful green. Perhaps we could establish a compromise. Doctor, could the lieutenant review non-critical engineering reports for a limited time each day? Under supervision, of course. Dr. Nixis considered this, their crystalline form refracting light in complex patterns. 2 hours daily, provided her recovery continues at its current rate. And only if she agrees to complete rest for the remainder of the day. Zara perked up visibly. I can work with that. You'll have to, Dr. Nixis said firmly. Because if you violate these terms, I'll have Pip monitor your neural patterns continuously. And they'll know if you're even thinking about engine schematics. Pip's antenna twitched with what might have been amusement. I already know, Doctor. She hasn't stopped thinking about them since she arrived. Vextra made a sound that might have been laughter, their scales shimmering with entertainment. Humans. You persist in finding ways to adapt, even to forced inactivity. That's kind of our thing, Zara agreed, already reaching for the data pad Dr. Nixis had confiscated. We adapt. We overcome. We drive medical professionals slightly crazy. Slightly. Dr. Nixis muttered, but there was a chime of affection in their crystalline voice. First Officer, I believe we've found another entry for your study of human psychological contradictions. Indeed, Vextra agreed, their scales settling into a calm blue-green. They heal faster when busy, yet need to be forced to rest. They ignore pain until forced to acknowledge it, then joke about their own stubbornness. Zara, already engrossed in an engineering report, looked up with a grin. Just wait until you have to deal with a human with a common cold. Then you'll really see some contradictions. The aliens exchanged glances, recognizing the warning tone in her voice. Sometimes, they realized, understanding humans meant accepting that you would never fully understand them at all. The revelation. The alarms shrieked through the space station, red emergency lights flashing in every corridor. Jace jerked awake in the med bay, his heart pounding. He could hear the muffled sounds of his crewmates shouting orders and the clang of boots on metal as they raced to their posts. Ignoring the dull ache in his side, Jace swung his legs over the edge of the bed and stood, swaying slightly. He glanced around the empty med bay, realizing Xyloth and Quill must have been called away to deal with the crisis. "Computer, status report," Jace barked, his voice hoarse. "Hull breach detected in Sector 7, the computer responded calmly. "Emergency force fields are holding, but structural integrity is at 60%. Repair crews are en route." Jace cursed under his breath. Sector 7 housed the station's main power core. If the breach reached it before repairs were complete, the whole station could be compromised. He had to get down there. Limping to the supply cabinet, Jace found a spare uniform and painfully shrugged it on, gritting his teeth. His injured side protested with every movement, but he pushed the pain to the back of his mind. There was no time. The corridors were eerily empty as Jace made his way to Sector 7, the flashing emergency lights casting strange shadows. He could hear the hissing of escaping atmosphere as he approached the breach site. Rounding the corner, he found a scene of controlled chaos. Quill was directing a team of engineers who were frantically working to seal the breach, sparks flying from their welding torches. Xyloth stood at a console, his long fingers flying over the controls as he attempted to reinforce the emergency force fields. "Jace!" Xyloth exclaimed as he caught sight of the human. "What are you doing here? You should be in the med bay." "I'm here to help," Jace said firmly, striding forward. He assessed the situation with a quick glance, his engineer's mind already racing through possible solutions. "The force fields won't hold much longer," Xyloth said tightly. "If we can't seal that breach, we need to reroute power from the auxiliary generators to the structural integrity fields," Jace said, moving to another console. "That should buy us some time." Xyloth stared at him. "But the auxiliaries are already at maximum capacity. Drawing any more could overload them." "Not if we recalibrate the power flow regulators first," Jace countered. His fingers danced across the controls, inputting commands. "I've done this before, trust me." Quill glanced over from where he was supervising the repair crews. "Do it," he barked to Xyloth. "We're out of options." Xyloth hesitated only a moment before nodding. Together, he and Jace worked to carefully divert power from the strained auxiliary generators. Jace grimaced as he shifted, his injury sending bolts of pain through him, but he didn't stop. Slowly, the shrieking alarms began to quiet and the flashing light steadied. On the view screen, they watched as the structural integrity field strengthened, glowing a more robust blue. The hissing of the breach faded as the repair crews managed to seal it at last. Silence fell over Sector 7 as everyone breathed a collective sigh of relief. Jace sagged against the console, suddenly lightheaded. Quill eyed him with a mixture of admiration and exasperation. "You never cease to amaze me, human," the medic said, shaking his head. "Crazy, but amazing." Xyloth turned to Jace, his expression unreadable. "That was extraordinarily reckless. You could have killed yourself, coming down here in your condition." Jace managed a tired smile. "Didn't have much choice, Doc. We were all in trouble." "Indeed," Xyloth said slowly. "But I fail to understand how you can so casually disregard your own well-being. Do humans truly place so little value on their own lives?" Jace met the doctor's piercing gaze, a lifetime of human history and hard lessons behind his eyes. It's not about us, Doc. It's about doing what needs to be done, no matter the cost. For the greater good. That's just who we are. Xyloth stared at him a long moment, some unidentifiable emotion flickering across his alien features. Finally, he nodded. Then it seems we still have much to learn from your species, Lieutenant Sullivan. Much indeed. Jace smiled wearily as Quill helped him up, ready to drag him back to the medbay. The crisis was over, the station was safe, and he had a feeling his alien crewmates would never look at him quite the same way again. Just another day for a human in space. The reckoning. Jace sat on the edge of his bed in the medbay, his head bowed. The adrenaline of the crisis had long since faded, leaving him sore and exhausted. He sensed rather than heard Xyloth enter the room, the doctor's footsteps nearly silent. You should be resting, Xyloth said, coming to stand before him. His tone was neutral, giving nothing away. Jace looked up, meeting the doctor's inscrutable gaze. Probably, he agreed. But I think we both know that's not going to happen until we've had this conversation. Xyloth tilted his head, a gesture Jace had come to recognize as a sign of curiosity. And what conversation is that, Lieutenant? Jace sighed, running a hand through his hair. The one where you try to understand why I did what I did. Why I risked my life, my recovery, to help with the emergency. Xyloth was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was carefully measured. I will admit, your actions today were perplexing to me. By all medical standards, you should not have even been able to stand, let alone offer your technical expertise under such duress. Jace shrugged, then winced as the motion pulled at his injury. Humans are a tough breed, Doc. We're used to pushing ourselves beyond our limits when the situation demands it. But why? Xyloth asked, genuine confusion in his voice. Why risk so much, when there were others who could have handled the problem? Do you place so little value on your own life? Jace met the doctor's eyes, his gaze fierce. It's not about the value I place on my own life. It's about the value I place on the lives of others. On the mission we're all here to accomplish. He took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. Humans, we have a saying back on Earth. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. It means that sometimes, we have to be willing to sacrifice ourselves for the greater good. To put others before ourselves, even if it means we might get hurt or worse. Xyloth was silent, absorbing this. Jace could practically see the gears turning in the doctor's mind as he tried to reconcile this philosophy with his own understanding. I'm not saying it's always the right call, Jace continued. And it's not something we do lightly. But when push comes to shove, when lives are on the line, a human will always step up. We can't do anything else. It's just who we are. Slowly, Xyloth nodded. I think I am beginning to understand, he said softly. Your species' capacity for self-sacrifice, for putting the collective before the individual, it is both admirable and terrifying. Jace chuckled, then grimaced as his side twinged. Yeah, we get that a lot, he said wryly. Xyloth's expression softened, something like respect in his eyes. You are a credit to your kind, Lieutenant Sullivan, he said. And I am honored to serve with you, even if your propensity for reckless heroism is likely to give me several more gray hairs before this mission is over. Jace grinned, the tension draining from his body. Just keep patching me up, Doc, he said. I'll do my best to make sure you don't have to do it too often. Xyloth shook his head, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. See that you do, Lieutenant. The universe needs more humans like you, I think. But it would be a shame if you did not live to see the good your sacrifices will do. With that, the doctor turned and left, leaving Jace alone with his thoughts. He laid back on the bed, staring up at the medbay ceiling. His body still ached and his mind was weary, but his spirit felt lighter somehow. They had a long way to go, he and his alien crewmates. A long journey of understanding and trust ahead of them. But today, they had taken an important step. Today, they had begun to see each other not just as human and alien, but as something more. As comrades. As friends. As beings who, despite all their differences, shared the same unshakable resolve, to protect, to persevere, and to fight for each other until the very end. It was a start, Jace thought as he drifted off to sleep. A start of something extraordinary. The end.